The Tomahawk series from MSI has always been one of their very good mid-range motherboards. With the launch of Intel B760, we now have this new MSI B760 Tomahawk Wi-Fi. Where does this motherboard stand? Let's take a look. So you can see right off the bat, we already have the motherboard in front of us. So let's just do a very quick unboxing to see what's left inside the motherboard. We have a Wi-Fi antenna, one SATA cable, additional locker for M.2, stickers, EU regulatory notice, and a quick install guide. With this new generation of motherboards, to save the environment, MSI has stopped providing manuals inside their motherboard boxes. If you want to know more about this B760 Tomahawk, watch till the end of this video, or you can download the manual from the motherboard website. Okay, so likewise in my previous B760 video, I'm gonna just do very simple conventions for this new motherboard. B760, I'm just gonna call it B7s, and B660s as B6. A lot easier to pronounce for me because it's hard to pronounce S and S's. This B760 features a very nice all-black gunmetal finish design. Very characteristic of their military arsenal design. We also see this design on the B6 Tomahawk. Very black, very subtle. Heatsinks are all black, heat shields are black, the chipset covers are black. On the back, also very subtle, no crazy design, no crazy motif. Unlike the previous B760 motherboard we took a look at, it looked very clean and no nonsense inside a very standard gaming PC. So if you want the other stuff, for example like your GPU and your RAM to give the rest of the blink, you can do so because the black accents gives a very nice contrast to the otherwise maybe white GPU or RGB, ARGB on your RAM or your graphics cards. Okay, so first thing about this new motherboard, this B760 motherboard supports both 13th gen as well as 12th gen CPUs. You can use, for example, your 13600K or your 12600K on this B760 Tomahawk. So going next to the socket, you can see that the VRM heatsinks as well as the IO shield heatsinks are very thick, also very standard and also very characteristic of the military gunmetal arsenal design for the Tomahawk series. I believe these heatsinks provide a very good coverage if you want to overclock your CPU. For example, if you want to use your 3900K on this motherboard, you can overclock it. And I think the VRM heatsinks should be enough to handle the amount of heat that the VRMs may produce during your OC of the 3900K. So talking about overclockability, we have 2x8-pin power on this B760 Tomahawk. It seems to be more standard than the 8+4 pin we saw on the competitor motherboard. With 2 8-pin power, this motherboard can deliver up to 300 watts of power. A 3900K seems to be more comfortable running off this motherboard. I don't want to say for sure that you can't run your 3900K on that motherboard, 8+4 pin, but with 2 8 pins, I feel it provides more power coverage for something like a 3900K. I can be wrong about that. I'll probably have to test it, do some simple OC to see how much power it draws. And that's provided I have a 3900K to play with. Okay, next, this is a DDR5 motherboard. There's also a DDR4 variant of this B760 Tomahawk, but these 4 slots are definitely made for DDR5. Please don't use your D4 RAM on this motherboard. If you want to use your D4 RAM, you can buy the B760 Tomahawk DDR4 variant. Still trying to figure out how to get the full rated speeds with 4 sticks of DDR5 RAM. For front I/O, very standard, USB 3.2 Gen 1 connectors, USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type-C, and 2 USB 2.0 connectors. Okay, third point or fourth point, I don't really remember. If you want your RGB, ARGB to bling up the motherboard, to bling up your PC, this board has 2 RGB and 2 ARGB connectors. You can put up many RGB or ARGB strips on this motherboard. This board also has no shortage of chassis fan headers, up to 5. You have 2 here, 2 at the bottom, and 1 slightly tucked away from the CPU socket. So this guy, as you guys may know, is used very commonly for your exhaust fan. For storage, we have 3 M.2 slots and 4 SATA ports. All M.2 slots run at PCIe 4.0 X4 speeds and are all shielded, which is good for your SSDs. But a point of note, if you were to use the last M.2 slot, SATA port number 7 will turn off. It's not really a problem because if you're buying a motherboard like this, you will probably only use maybe 2 M.2s or up to, I don't know, 2 or 3 SATA devices. If you want to use 3 M.2 slots, you still have 3 more SATA ports to work with. So there's still plenty of storage if you want to max out the amount of storage ports that you can have on this motherboard. So there's one thing I also like to mention. While I'm trying to unscrew this first M.2 slot, I feel that the screws on this are a bit too tight. It takes a lot more effort to unscrew this. I'm not sure it's because it's a new motherboard, the screws are still very stiff, but probably after a few adjustments, a few unscrewing and screwing in, the screws should be less stiff and it should be a lot easier to remove the screws and put it back on. But the other issue right now I see is on the lower M.2 slot. While trying to remove this screw over here, it seems to be stuck to the standoff that you have over here. I'm not sure if there's something wrong with the screw thread or the standoff is basically stuck to the M.2 heat shield. It is a lot harder to remove this screw without breaking the standoff. I don't want to keep removing and putting back on, so you just have to watch the video to see how it looks like. Where do your GPU as well as your PCIe devices go to? Of course, the first one is where you put your GPU, the one in the heat shield, 5.0x16. The one at the bottom is a 3.0x4, and the last one is a 4.0x1. Very interesting design decision from MSI to give this as a 3.0 and the last one at 4.0. I guess you can use a capture card for the second slot, and this one, usually you can use a Wi-Fi card or a sound card, but you don't really need it because this board has Wi-Fi 6E and Bluetooth 5.3. The audio on this motherboard should be pretty okay. It uses the Realtek ALC897 codec. Alright, next thing, there is no clear CMOS button on this motherboard. If you want to have a clear CMOS button, you have to buy a Z790 motherboard. From there, we're going to go on to the back I/O. So a very interesting design decision here also for MSI, maybe because I've not seen the B6 motherboards. MSI decides to put USB 2.0 at the top. Not really a problem, you still have your DisplayPort and HDMI. The ones in red are USB Type A ports. These are 10 gig ports. On top is the 2.5G LAN port. The one in silver is a USB Type-C 20 gig port. You also have your 2 gold connectors for your Wi-Fi 6E and Bluetooth 5.3, as well as your standard 5 audio jacks and 1 SPD port. Okay, so I was trying to do a simple setup and I faced an issue. This is the Cooler Master PL360 Flux backplate. It does not fit with the motherboard backplate. It's too small. I believe it's because the socket backplate is too thick. It doesn't have enough room for the backplate to go on. So you have to use something like this, a more squarish backplate from the MSI coolers. Because these backplates, you can move between the sizes. So this is the maximum size for LGA 1700. Yeah, it should fit quite well. Yep, you can see it is quite flushed. Just a point of note, if you want to use the Cooler Master coolers, somehow you will not be able to do so. But coolers with this more squarish backplate shouldn't be a problem for this motherboard. Okay, so I'd like to take this opportunity to also show you what's new in this MSI BIOS. So first thing, the MAG splash screen, very standard. CPU core temperature, memory size, and what is your BIOS version and build date. So let's go on to settings. Shows your system status, shows your date and time, what kind of SSD you have on your motherboard, and we go to advanced. So first thing you want to do is go to your PCI sub settings. So you can see that resizable bar is automatically now enabled on this motherboard, and likewise your above 4G memory and cryptocurrency mining is also automatically enabled, so you don't have to forget to turn on your resizable bar on this Intel motherboard. Then next we can go on to our integrated graphics configuration. That is if you want to use your iGPU on this Intel processor, but don't worry, you can also see the iGPU is automatically enabled on this new BIOS. You have both your iGPU as well as your discrete GPU graphics now on this motherboard enabled. You can change the amount of VRAM you want to give to your iGPU. Maximum you have here is 160 megabytes. So you have here also the Secure Erase Plus. That is if you want to wipe your SSD. I'm not going to do that, of course, because I don't want to wipe my SSD. The next big thing you have here is the MSI Driver Utility Installer. So what this does is when you go to Windows, there will be an MSI suite where you can install all of your basic drivers. For example, you have your audio driver, your chipset driver, your wireless, as well as your LAN driver, all provided inside this MSI suite. But of course, if you find this MSI suite too much of a bloatware, you can always disable it. Next, we go on to our OC Explore mode. I don't know what is the deal here. The OC Explore mode is automatically set to expert. In the previous generation motherboards is usually in normal, so Intel is sort of hinting to you that you should want to try to overclock your Intel CPU. But I'm not going to do that. We're just going to leave the P core as well as the E cores at their standard base clock as well as max turbo boost clocks. And going on to the advanced CPU configuration, because I'm using an AIO which is water cooled, BIOS picks it up and now it's automatically set to the maximum wattage that we have on the long duration power limit, which is 4096 watts. Back then, I remember with Gordon, we have to manually set this to the maximum power limit, but now in this new BIOS, it automatically sets to 4096 watts to give you the max space if you want to overclock your CPU. Next, the big one, instead of XMP, is now known as iExpo. Similar to Team Red, which is known as Expo 2, they now call it iExpo. It's sort of like telling you, I can overclock my RAM instead of Extreme Memory Profile or XMP. We're just going to enable it, and enable it to get our full 6000 MHz on our 2 sticks of RAM. So you may be wondering, where do I enable my virtualization? It is no longer inside the advanced CPU configuration page, but it has since moved to the bottom in this thing called CPU features. So you can see Intel Virtualization Tech. It is also automatically enabled on this new motherboard. Intel is just telling you, I'm just going to do everything for you. Turn on your VM software, turn on your resizable bar. Don't have to worry about forgetting to do all of this when you set up your new PC. But it's good to also go back into your BIOS, especially when you're building a new PC, to see if all of these settings are turned on. Last thing, of course, you got to go to a hardware monitor. This is where we tune our fans. I'm just going to leave it at this setting. It is a very interesting AIO because the CPU fan is 3-pin instead of the usual 4-pin. So I'm going to leave it in the DC mode to give it the max utilization of the fans. So this B7 Tomahawk seems to be pretty okay. It has the usual standard of the Tomahawk motherboards. I do not have the price for this B760 Tomahawk, but I'm guessing it's going to be pretty okay as compared to the Z7 motherboards. It has 3 M.2 slots, which I think is pretty okay. The screws on the M.2s could use some work, especially the one at the bottom, which is the one connected to the M.2 standoff. As for the expansion configuration, 3.0x4 on the second slot is actually not an issue because, for example, a capture card works pretty okay on a 3.0 slot. Even though this is the DDR5 variant, I actually prefer this variant because it is good to have more forward-looking features such as DDR5 RAM. I think this may be the last generation where we will see both D5 as well as D4 on the same motherboard. I think this board, as with the other Tomahawk motherboards, are pretty good mid to high-end motherboard range. If you want to go into Intel LJ1700 13th Gen CPUs, you can consider this B760 Tomahawk. But of course, if you want to have more features, better looking motherboard, more expansion slots, you can look at MSI's Z790 range. If you like this video, let me know in the comments what you think of this B7 Tomahawk. Watch this video and make sure to come back to our channel for more awesome tech content.